Go ahead and watch the live, and we are live. Now we are live. I can tell we are live. See, I used to shout that real loudly. So hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Barbara Tien with Projectkin, and joining me here is Dai Davies from Genealogy.
Yeah.
Trying anyway. As a matter of fact, I'm learning all kinds of things about Wales and Welsh, and you too will have a chance to do that. And I will include some wonderful links to learning all about speaking Welsh, as well as the all about Wales in the notes following when I share the recording for this. So welcome, everyone. It's a delight to have you on this out here in California, a rainy morning, and up in northeastern Canada. Hello, Canada. Welcome, Kathy. Kathy Nielsen, lovely to see you. And Mason is fed up. So I get it. I get it. I am too, frankly. But hello, Bill. Lovely to see you. Good morning, everyone. So we have an interesting story here today. Joining me on this preview, a Substack preview Sunday here in California, as we do these, we're picking up on our Stories250 series we do each month. And we have kind of an unexpected story here that I think sort of hits at the core of what I've been talking about all along in Stories250, looking for ways to tell the stories of where our ancestors were at the time of the American Revolution. And my secret plan here, everybody, is to highlight how the Enlightenment itself was a global trend, or as Di and I were talking about, maybe they were passing around hashtag Enlightenment, as they'd say in their letters. But this picks up on a story that Di wrote about libraries in Wales at the time of the American Revolution, or the lead up to the American Revolution. And the reason I think that's so important is the same reason I think libraries and public education and an educated populace to drive the idea of a country at the founding of this country, which is what this whole thing is all about. And that's where Guy's story picks up. And it's important to American history, as we see in the words of people like John Adams, who was talking about in his own diaries in 1765. The liberty cannot be preserved without general knowledge among the people. Like, one writes that in a diary, in any case. And you probably know about Benjamin Franklin and the founding of his own, apparently the first lending library in the American colonies in 1731. And then, of course, Thomas Jefferson and the founding of the Library of Congress, with making sure that money was set aside to do that in 1800. And he set burning out and saving it when it was under fire by a certain little battle that happened in 1812. But we're not going to go there because we're talking to Canada here today. And with that, let me back up. And Di, tell me a little bit about the story that you posted and what brings you here to tell the story, and how you've seen this as part of this larger story.
Okay. So I think that my story might be a little bit different from some of the other stories, in the sense that I didn't focus on a particular ancestor. Like you said, I focused on a lending library that was started in 1765. And so at that time, most of my ancestors were in Wales. And in Wales for this time period, it's really difficult to research your ancestors. So a lot of my branches of my family tree, they go back to people born in the 1770s, but that generation I know barely anything about. And part of that is because of the record sets. Um, Wales and England got new parish record books in 1813. And so what you find is that often the earlier books got destroyed, or they got lost, or one of the ones that is really critical to my family history research has turned into like a sopping, moldy mound. That even in the early 1900s, I have an account where this antiquarian was going through it, and he had to flip the pages with a fish fillet knife, flip it over very gently. And so, really, I don't know a lot about most of my ancestors 250 years ago. But the one group of my ancestors that I do know about are, I refer to them as the Davises of Goitre Isav Farm. And they come from the parish of Llangibby, which is in the southwest part of Wales. And it's like a really tiny parish with like no more than, there definitely weren't more than 300 people living there at a time. So Welsh settlements are very like dispersed. So it's not like the village where everyone lives. It's like farmland with like a little sprinkling of houses throughout. And so what my Davises of Goitre Sav Farm were doing 250 years ago were preparing their children with a good education. They were like, they were quite well to do. They were tenant farmers, and they farmed somewhere above 100 acres of land. Um, and so, like, I wanted to focus in on this aspect of their life that I did know about and see if I can find anything more about it to write about for this amazing project. Um, and so, in on September 25th, 1765, a chest of books arrived at the neighboring parish of Keslan. And this was what was referred to as the Thomas Bray Lending Library. And the library, it offered books, theological books mostly, to the parishioners and people from neighboring parishes. But the thing that I'm really interested in is how um, it tied this like small rural parish into this global network of libraries and educational institutions. And so you have them popping up in the West Indies, in Bengal, in Newfoundland, in Canada, South Africa, and also in the United States, in Maryland,
The soon to
Virginia.
be
Oh,
United
yes,
States.
soon to be United States. We're talking the British Empire at this time, I
Yeah.
guess.
No, but
Um,
but pause for a moment there. We're
yeah.
talking the British Empire, but look
Mhm,
at what it did. Is that's kind of the point, is that when people get that kind of education, they think for themselves. Who
mhm.
knew? So go
Yep.
on.
Yeah, and so they were in Maryland, Virginia, New York, and Pennsylvania.
Mhm.
Um, and there were also Thomas Bray. He also created schools, and some of the schools that he created in the United States, because I think for a period of his life he actually immigrated from England to the United States.
Oh,
Some of the schools that he established there were meant to teach enslaved people how to read.
wow, and
Um,
abolitionists too.
yeah, so
BRAY or EY?
Bray. Yes.
AY. Mhm.
So like
Calling all brave family members.
yeah.
Pay attention.
Yeah, so like it's pretty like for that time it would have been like pretty revolutionary stuff because like this being like the first library for this parish in Wales, but also like you don't get universal elementary education until 1871 in Wales and England. So that's another 100 years in the future, right?
Mhm.
And so like at that time, like I said, my ancestors were preparing their children with education. So they had to do that through other means than through the state. So their chapel, which was called Kilgwyn Chapel, they had a school associated with them by around 1700.
Mhm.
And so I find that all of my ancestors who attended this chapel got like this uncommon degree of education. Even I found women born in like I think it was like the 1680s being able to write their name in
Mhm.
the early 1700s. So they had this educational center. And then they also had this really interesting tradition of sending their children away to England to get an education.
Very wealthy. Mhm.
Yeah. And so they'd like send them along the drovers' roads to
Boys, I would assume.
yeah, for the early part, it was probably just boys, but there was also a girls' school and a mixed gender school in Hereford. There were three main schools that they were sending their kids to. So, like
Uh-huh.
in the 1800s, and especially like the later 1800s up to this
Right,
1871 cutoff
right.
date, they have girls going to school as well.
Wow. There are actually, I know quite a few. Sorry to keep interrupting. There are
Yeah.
quite a few one place studies I know that are in the Hereford area
Mm,
and so on here on that I bump into in our community.
cool.
Go on.
And so at this time as well in the like late 1700s, my my Davises of Goitresa farm are well, it's Timothy Jacobs, the father, and Eleanor Thomas is the mother. All of the children end up going by Davis, so that's where the Davis comes from. But Eleanor's sister married a Baptist minister. And then they together went off to Hereford in like the 1740 or 1750s, and he opens the school there. So they're actually sending their children to their uncle to get
I
this
see.
education.
I see. A quick question. Would the
Yeah.
Baptists be nonconformists? I
Yes.
mean, that's
Yeah.
like a pretty scandalous. Okay.
Yeah,
Go
so the nonconformists, that includes like the Baptists, the
Baptists, the
Methodists,
Anabaptists, the Methodists. Yeah,
Presbyterians, eventually the Unitarians, which is where a lot of my ancestors became Unitarians, Congregationalists, and Independents.
I see.
And
Okay.
I love religious history in Wales. Had no interest until I started researching my ancestors, but it's become like a really like central part of their lives, which has been really fascinating. Um, but this uncle, he became known as the historian of the Welsh Baptists after publishing his big history of the Baptist movement in Wales and everything. Um, and so, like, these ancestors of mine, while their native language was Welsh, they were coming home also being able to speak in English and potentially being able to read these books from the Thomas Bray Library, which were all in
Mhm,
English as well.
mhm.
But of course, like, not all of the people in this part of Wales had as much money to send their children off to England to go learn. But at the same time as that's happening, there is a massive educational movement in Wales. And this started in 1730, and it was led by Reverend Griffith Jones and Madam Bridget Bevan. And so they got together in 1730 and they were like, we need to teach people religious values. We need to teach them the values of the Church of England. And so, how are we going to do that? And so, what they did was they created these traveling or circulating charity schools. And so, what they would do is they would train teachers and then send them out to whatever parish invited them, because parishes would write in probably like the ministers or locally influential people would write them, and then they'd get their teachers who would stay in the parish for 3 or 4 months. And they would hold day classes and teach anyone who showed up how to read, and they would use, of course, the Bible to do that.
Right.
And really kind of subversive about this movement is that they were teaching people how to read in English, or sorry, in Welsh. They were not teaching people how to read in English. They were teaching them how to read in
Oh,
Welsh.
whoa.
And
You
so,
count on those nonconformists. They're going to bust the rules again and again. You give them
yeah.
mouse a cookie or
Well, the funny
cat a
thing is
treat.
that they weren't nonconformists. They were Church of England. But what ended up happening is because they taught everyone how to read in Welsh, Welsh people were reading the Bible more, and then they had all of their opinions about what was going on in the Bible. And so they actually set the groundwork for the big Methodist movement that happened throughout the 1700s. It was because
Mhm.
of their work doing this educational work that the Methodists, which it was Calvinistic Methodism, which was originated in a parish just like two parishes from where my ancestors were. Um, it made it possible for that to happen. Um, but because they were teaching in Welsh, they were getting all of this pushback from other organizations who wanted the Welsh language to fizzle out and not be used anymore. Um,
Speaking of
yeah.
rhyming themes, yeah.
Yeah. And so like it's really interesting reading Griffith Jones's letters about his organization and his work because he had to be really well versed in all of the reasons why people should be learning to read in Welsh. And it's just fascinating, like from religious arguments to financial arguments, because he was like, it's taking them 5 years to teach people how to read in English when it's taking me 3 months to teach people to read in Welsh. We should be doing what I'm doing. And so uh, so yeah, it's just what they ended up doing was reaching over 300,000 people and teaching them how to read in Welsh. And the population of Wales at that time was no more than 500,000.
Wow.
So yeah, over half the population learning how to read by like the end of the
Yeah.
1700s.
Now, pause for a minute and look
Mhm.
back at what's happening across the oceans here, where you have the same kinds of, religious, both getting away from, but also kind of arguing about spreading of religion, spreading of teachings and education. The layering in of the language angle is quite something. And by the way,
Mhm.
if y'all don't know Dai here, and welcome, Kyla, they're quite the expert on both the language and the history. Quite the scholar and the go-to for any of this kind of genealogical work. But we'll get back to that. So keep on, go on. This was
Uh,
an interstitial plug.
And so like it's interesting to see like all of these different educational moments, whether it's this like big movement of the circulating Welsh charity schools, which went from 1730 all the way up to 1778. Plus my ancestors sending their children off to get their education in England, and then also on top of that having this like long tradition of education through their chapel. Um,
Mhm.
like what it putting it all together, like it feels like they're setting this groundwork where having a library in this place would make sense and where it would be actually used. So like those are kind of like the foundation of this little chest of books that arrive
And
in the parish.
a stupid question. This little chest of books is more than the Bible. What else is in the
Oh.
books?
My I call him my research buddy. His name is George Erie Evans, and
Uh-huh.
he was a unit. I think he was a Unitarian minister, but he never like held a position anywhere. But he was also an antiquarian, and he was obsessed with the history of Unitarianism in this part of Wales, which ended up making him pretty obsessed with parts of my family, which is great for me in finding records and everything. But he's the one that I learned. Um, Sorry, he's long gone.
I
He
gathered
passed away
has
ages ago.
yeah.
But I learned through an article he wrote about
Again,
this finding.
I'm gonna have you drop for me the particulars, or I'm going to go back and look at the article that you have written to make sure both for Thomas Bray and for George, and I missed the rest of the name with the birth and death dates. We can put it
Oh,
in the notes so
um,
that I know you know it off the top of your head, but frankly, and a link to a family search or something, because family members of these
mm,
people are going to like look at this video and say, "Oh, just saying."
yep.
Okay, go on. So,
So
history of Unitarianism.
yeah, but George Erie Evans, he wrote this article in the newspapers in like the early 1900s. In 1904 it was. And he actually got in touch with someone who had this chest of books still. So like over 100 and uh almost 150 years later, I guess. The chest of books still partially existed. And out of the 36 volumes, I think there were like 8 or 9 that were still there. And so they were all kinds of like different religious books. So one was called the Christian's Way to Heaven, which was first published in 1700. And then another one was called The Original and Right of Tithes, from 1691. And one of the interesting things that he notes in this little article that he published is that there are books in the collection that were printed after the little lending library chest arrived in the parish. So they were adding books to it, which is really cool and shows that like it was actually getting used, it was getting augmented. So that's really, really neat thing that he
Really
included.
reminds me of these little libraries. I don't know if you have that trend in Canada, but we have these, people will stick out on the right next to the mailbox
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
sidewalk, a little library. There's a brand and everything.
yeah. Yeah,
Take
exactly
a book,
that.
add a book.
Mhm. Yeah. And so the thing that I find really interesting about like this history of education is that like the more literate you were, the more access you had to what was going on around in the world.
Letters.
Um, Letters, news, well, not really newspapers yet at that time, but like monthly journals. Um, and there's actually one of my ancestors from this group of people was named David Davis of Castell Howell. And he ended up becoming he was like the most important education person in Wales in the early 1800s, and his sister is my 7 times great grandmother.
Wow.
So he's my most famous ancestor. So I talk about him a bit. But it's been really interesting, like seeing how this history of education like influenced his trajectory in life, and then how he himself became a part of the history of education in Wales. But one of his friends I find really fascinating because his diary has been digitized. And his name was John Davis the Bookbinder. And so he passed away, I think, in it might have been 1801 or 1799, but around the turn of the century. And he loved poetry. And all throughout his diary, there are little like excerpts from poems. He's got full poems. He's got them in English. He's got them in Welsh. And he was also really interested in these revolutionary ideas that were circulating at the time. And so He has this one poem about it's about the American Revolution and the French Revolution. But it's written by Philip Freneau, who is known as the poet of the American Revolution. And if it's okay, I'd like to read just
Oh,
two stanzas.
please.
So this is the first two stanzas of a poem called God Save the Rights of Man. So it goes, God save the rights of man and give us hearts to scan, blessings so dear. May they be spread around wheresoever man is found, and with the wholesome sound ravish the ear. See from the universe, darkness and clouds disperse, mankind awake. Reason and mirth appear, freedom advances near, despots with terror hear, see now the quake.
Mm.
I love it. It gives me tingles. It's such a good poem.
You need to send me that one too, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, I will. And it's funny reading this not through Philip Freneau, but reading it through this diary because as he transcribed it into his diary, after "See now the quake," he put three big exclamation marks, which are not in the original poem.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is humbling. It is humbling. And a reminder of what we need to do with what we have been given.
Mhm.
And boy, if that doesn't describe the responsibilities of democracy, I don't know what does.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Mm.
this diary, it kind of inspired me to work on or to create my current blog project that I'm writing,
Uh-huh.
or that I'm putting out into the world now each month, which is a poetry project. So I've gone through my family tree and I've collected all of the little poems that have survived from different ancestors, and I'm writing little creative writing pieces for each one, and also including the poem as well. Because poetry is a thing that Wales is kind of like it's a important part of Welsh culture, that form of writing, going all the way
Mhm.
back into like medieval times. I think the earliest
Mhm.
Welsh poems are from like 800 or something like that.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and it's just kind of been throughout my family in different parts. So I put
Oh.
my first post out, which you saw, and I really appreciated your comment on it, which were the about the answering machine songs that my grampy used to leave us when he'd call and leave the message on the answering machine. So yeah.
Well, there were many charming things about that one, but language, as you and I have already talked about, language is very important to me, and the ways in which language teach you culture, things about cultures that you would never ever pick up from a simple "this means that" translation.
Mhm.
And the beauty of a language that is so distinctly different, living in completely surrounded by this other language in between Wales and and England, and now in Canada with both English and French. Side by side here we struggle with so many different languages in a single area. The fact that Wales has had this tradition of both education and poetry, and that this was something extending back to the very time of our American Revolution, or the Civil War with Britain, the divorce, um, is breathtaking and a wonderful
Yeah.
part of this education. Thank you so much, particularly for bringing in Philip Renault. Renault?
Freneau. Freneau.
Freneau. Um,
Freneau. And
you're gonna
what
sing
you
it.
just said reminded me also that him having this poem in his diary, living in Britain ruled by a monarch, quite dangerous. He could have gotten
Exactly.
into a lot of trouble having this. And
Yeah.
my ancestor, his friend, at one point, like they knew that he was
Rebel.
a rebel, that he was a supporter of the French Revolution. I don't know. I don't know so much about what he thought about the American Revolution, but certainly the French Revolution. Him and all of the Unitarian community were very
Bunch of rabble
connected to
rousers.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can you imagine? And the terror, I mean, heads off, right? The guillotine.
yeah,
It must have been quite something. Quite
yeah.
something.
But my ancestor, he was only targeted with some. They were gonna have the surveyor of taxes read all of his letters before they were sent off and before he got to read them himself. But he got like a really nice letter of character, like a
Reference.
character reference, yeah, from a an Anglican clergyman which ended up allowing him to not have that level of
Friends in high
censorship
places.
affect him. Yeah.
Yeah. God, this
Yeah.
is like Game of Thrones stuff. Wow.
Yeah. And
This is Kathy Stone just chimes in here. A big light bulb here. I studied Old English at university. Not much poetry based.
mm,
Old Norse mythology. Yeah.
cool.
And again, languages, each culture.
Yeah.
And there we are. What a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
taking the time this morning, this afternoon,
I do
for
have a little
you.
conclusion
Oh,
that I wanted to
please.
say
Yes,
because I
please do.
wrote this part out because I wanted to tie it into
Oh,
what's happening
yeah.
today. Just
Go
a little
on.
bit, just a little bit. But I think that this whole little article that I read, which is a real overview of just like moments from educational history, but as you look more into the history of education, you can tell that there was this hunger for education and for knowledge. And that goes for that part of my family, but also, when you look at the success of the Bray libraries, which went all around the world, you look at the massive success of the circulating Welsh charity schools across all of Wales in the 18th century, you can tell that people saw the value of being able to read and being able to write. They wanted that knowledge. And I think that through telling these stories is one of the ways that we can honor this legacy of the struggles that they went through to make that actually happen for them and for the next generations. And I think it's especially important to tell these stories today because of the ways that we find schools all over the world so severely underfunded. We see teachers so incredibly overworked. We see schools targeted by censorship campaigns. And then, in the worst cases, schools being targeted in war.
Mhm.
And I think that part of the good that we can do as storytellers is in highlighting these kinds of stories about all of the work that our ancestors did just to be able to access education and knowledge.
Mhm.
And we can show it through our family history stories, that we can also live this spirit of investigation and learning and creativity even when we're long out of school. And I think family
Yeah.
historians have that spirit in us. And I love that. And so that's something that I was hoping to show through this article that I wrote for Stories 250, and also with my new writing project about my ancestors who wrote poetry. Just
Yeah.
continue that on.
Thank you so much. That's such a beautiful conclusion. And to me, the really important nugget about that relates to how we talk about education as something to let me learn so that I know, so that I can add value and have things for me.
Mhm.
What you're talking about is education as it relates to a growing population and what that population is doing going forward and contributing forward, and not to forget that difference. That is so foundational, and I certainly hope that that's a really important contribution, that what we do as genealogists makes the difference. And Dr. Mary, you've been talking about this all along. It's so good to see you joining us today. And one of the great stories as to why I want to be making sure that we are making clear references to the people that you've mentioned here in these stories, because I know if there were my ancestors, I'd want to be go learn from you, and a lot of this. This has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you.
And oh, no worries, Mary. Well, there's a good recording in here for us. And as I always tell people at the end, I go out of my way to put a lot of detail into the notes. I hope it's valuable. And Di and I have talked a little bit about this ahead of time. And they're going to be sending me maps and other details, names, and so on, so that my notes can be meaningful as points of reference. And of course, how to reach Di for your own research into Wales, because I mean, wow, such a resource. And thank you so much for making yourself available.
Thank you. This was fun.
So, oh, thank you. Tell your friends.
Yeah.
No worries at all. So stay tuned for Stories 250. Of course, all of these are going into the collection at projectkin.org/stories 250. And I will be adding to it. We have a special event coming in July. And I have a note coming out to all of our contributors, whether they spoke live or not, to join me for, maybe I'm going to have to do 2 sessions on July 9th to do it justice, but we'll see how that goes together. But thank you, thank you, thank you. Stay tuned. Bye bye now.